Good afternoon and welcome back to the Fire Safety Forum series on hazardous materials. I'm Bob Campbell. I'm the chairman of the Hazmat panel this afternoon, and we have three more speakers that will be presenting different aspects of hazmat preparedness to include things like training and response strategies, as well as equipment. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ed Sullivan. Ed Sullivan has nearly 20 years of experience in the UK as a fire officer with hazmat experience. He works at the National Chemical Emergency Center as the lead on hazmat training and incident management in the support of chemical companies and international response organizations. With that, welcome, Ed. Please turn on your camera and your microphone, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks very much, Bob. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, wherever you're tuned in from around the world today. Thank you very much to the organisers of this event for inviting me here. It's an absolute pleasure to be given this opportunity to speak to you all, and I hope to get the opportunity to meet some of you later on. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to share some experiences and offer a solution or two to some of the problems that I've faced when training for hazmat incidents. But it's also a model which you could utilise with any other emergency response subject, and it can be tailored to suit your requirements and local, regional and national needs. And I'd be happy to talk about that with you also. It doesn't have to be directly linked into hazmats. So I'm going to talk to you about issues that I've experienced when working as the Hazmat and Incident Command Training Lead in a local authority fire and rescue service within the UK, as the head of hazmat at the UK Fire Service College, where I designed and delivered training to people from over 20 countries, and in my current role as Principal Hazmat Consultant at the National Chemical Emergency Centre. So I'd like to start by asking you a question. Now, you don't have to give me an answer to this question. If you just ponder over it for the next 15 minutes, and if you want to talk it through after the presentation, I'd be delighted to talk to you after in the networking area. So, if your responders were mobilised to an incident involving hazardous materials right now, right this very second, how confident would you be that they're trained well enough to be safe, effective, competent, and as confident as they should reasonably be expected to be? I'm not talking about them doing their best here. When I was listening to Meriav from Israel speak last week, and Bob, Manny, and Chad this morning, it couldn't have been any clearer that responders from all over the world are in it to do their best. What I mean is, how recently did they take part in effective training that's relevant to their role and which challenged them in a way that an operational incident would? I couldn't agree with Chad anymore when he said this morning, first responder training is of the utmost importance to have a successful incident. Now, why do I ask this question? I ask this question as I've been fortunate enough to train with response teams from many different countries, and there are some trends that have appeared. It appears that unless you're fortunate enough to be in a specialist hazmat team, hazmat training can often be neglected in some way or another. I've also heard it said many times that hazmat is a dark art, and this is something that I really disagree with, but I do understand why people would say this if they haven't had the opportunity to partake in sufficient training in this area. So where are your response teams on the competence scale? Are they at the peak or are they in a trough? And I'll come back to this again shortly. If you think, just before I move on to my next slide, if you think that your response teams are as competent as they could possibly be and they're ready to face any hazmat incident, then I congratulate you sincerely. Unfortunately though, in my experience, this is rare, as hazmat training is often limited and not always delivered by subject matter experts. So why is this? A lot of questions to start with, I know, but I also know how difficult it can be to ensure that our response teams receive high quality hazmat initial training and then ongoing continuous professional development training following on from that. And that's what you can see going on in this slide here. So what are some of the issues that I've come across then? And I'm going to come back to a point that I just made. And I'd like to look at peaks and troughs in competence. I'm sure if we're all being absolutely honest with ourselves, that this is something that we've all experienced, both in ourselves and in the people that we are responsible for. We complete our initial training and our competence can be good. And we just lack that operational exposure. But unless we do something proactively about it, we're at risk of our competence peaking prior to it falling back towards the trough, which puts our responders at risk as well as the people that they are there to serve, not to mention the reputation of our organisations. It doesn't have to be like this though. We should be aiming at the red line on the graph, a line which gradually increases over time as opposed to plateauing. So what are some of the other issues that we've got? Travel restrictions aren't something that have just come about since the outbreak of COVID-19. The requirement to travel to far and distant countries to receive high quality training has prevented people from taking part in courses for years now, whether that be due to the cost of travel or the time it would take for them to get there and back. When COVID travel restrictions come to an end, and they will there still be a desire to travel abroad for training? Or do technological advancements enable us to do something a little or very different? So what are the financial drivers then affected with receiving high quality hazmat training? Are they the course costs? Are they the accommodation costs? The travel costs? The costs of backfilling on a response rota to provide cover for a responder who is away studying? Now, of course, all of these are factors which must be taken seriously, and sometimes, in my experience, have prevented responders from taking part in the training that they, their organisation, and the people that they serve require them to take part in. In the UK, we've seen a reduction in fire and rescue service staffing of between 20 and 25% since the financial crisis due to cuts in funding. Yet, as we all know, incidents still happen, and we're still expected to put out highly trained, effective, safe, and competent team of responders to deal with any incident that may or may not have been anticipated. And one of the things that we did last year during lockdown at the National Chemical Emergency Centre is to monitor the number of calls that came in during lockdown to see if there was any trends between society quieting down and the number of calls that came in. And in fact, we were very surprised. What we saw was a slight increase in the number of calls, but an even bigger increase in the number of responses and our assistance required for major and more protracted incidents. So let's have a look at the environmental factors and your net zero and sustainability goals with regards to receiving hazmat training. We all need to do our bit to reduce travel by air or road, or in the modern world in which we find ourselves in, so that we get back to normal, as soon as we get back to normal. Do we want to take to the skies, the roads in the same way as we did pre-COVID, or do we want to build back better in a more environmentally friendly way? Now, if you and your organisation are working towards a net zero target, then there is a model that actually will suit you and will assist with that. So what's the solution then to these problems that we're faced with? The answer to our problems comes with a contemporary model of training, which helps organisations ensure their responders' competence doesn't dip. In fact, it doesn't even plateau, it grows. Experience is gained during initial training. With practice comes experience, from which comes competence and the ability to then utilise their own judgment when dealing with what are some of the most dangerous incidents they may ever have to respond to. And I know that I'm reiterating what other guest speakers have said this morning there when I say that. So how can we do this? What is this next generation training solution that we could implement to our organisations, and how can we use this to better the skills of our first responders? So foundation training can begin from the comfort of your own home or office, or if not there, then a location of your choice. By utilising a contemporary model of training, the learning begins without the learner having to travel anywhere at all, if that's what they choose to do, reducing the cost, reducing the travel requirements, and reducing the need to backfill on an operational rota to cover for someone who is attending a course. You don't have to physically go somewhere to be in a room with multiple subject matter experts these days. By utilizing technology, we can have a room full of people learning at the same time, interacting, asking questions, listening to one another, and learning from many different countries, all without leaving the office, which actually reminds me of the conversation that I was just having with the other panelists before coming on to give this speech. An example of how we've done this in practice is taking what has traditionally been a 3-week in-person course and delivering 2/3 of it virtually and 1/3 of it in person, which has reduced the cost of the course, reduced the amount of time the learner has to be away for, and reduced the environmental factors. But what is increasing is the amount of training that's being done and taken part in over time. You see, Hazmat's training doesn't have to be intensive. By spreading it out, we're less likely to be affected by skill fade, something that I've seen far too often in the world of Hazmat and other emergency response areas. Responders need to gain competence, but then it is vital for their own safety, if for no other reason, that they continue to take part in training and carry out continuous professional development. It's important to mention here that whilst I'm saying it is possible to do some training remotely, it's imperative that when we do train in person, that we facilitate on-the-job style training by creating operationally realistic scenarios for our responders to take part in. By implementing this Hazmat's training model, it means that our response teams are best prepared to respond to incidents by making them safer, more effective, increasing their competence, and giving them the confidence to carry out their role. I know this model works because it's something that we're already doing. We currently have 5 courses running and another 2 courses scheduled to commence within the next month. At the National Chemical Emergency Centre, we represent the UK at the CTIF Hazmat Commission on behalf of the National Fire Chiefs Council, which my colleague Dr. Nigel Blumeyer will talk to you about in the next slot. We offer support to over 650 organisations throughout the global chemical supply chain with their chemical risk challenges. We've worked with and provide advice and support to the emergency services in dealing with incidents involving hazmats in the UK for nearly 50 years now, in fact, since 1973, which enables us to spot trends on a local, national, global scale. So it is very important, though, that we remember that as responders, that most of us are not chemists. So to supplement high quality hazmat training, we need to ensure that we support responders with specialist scientific advisors who are able to provide proportionate advice, no matter what the time of day it is. We need to support our emergency response teams with specialist scientific advisors who don't just read off a safety data sheet, but they're able to discuss tactical options and answer questions that responders who are working at the sharp end may have. And finally, as I said earlier, the advice needs to be proportionate. Proportionality needs to run throughout everything we do in the world of emergency response, and therefore, so should the scientific advice. So to conclude this presentation, I'd like to go back to the beginning and ask the same question. If your responders were mobilized to an incident involving hazmat right now, right this very second, how confident would you be that they are trained well enough, that they are as safe, as effective, as competent, and as confident as they should reasonably be expected to be? If you're unsure about this, and you don't think that your responders are in quite the right place, I need you to think about whose responsibility it is to do something. Who is responsible for ensuring that your responders go home at the end of their shift? The reason I'm doing this is because I have a genuine concern that one of our responders is going to get injured or worse unless we do something about it. I want to do everything in my power to avoid what is now preventable. We've lost firefighters in the UK whilst dealing with hazmat incidents, and I know that this is also true for other parts of the world. It's no longer the case that hazmat training is out of reach due to travel restrictions, financial drivers, and environmental factors. We've listened to speakers talk about things that are out of our control, but the quality of hazmat training no longer fits into this category. Ted O'Brien from the Fire Service College is online today, as is, I think, Kevin Keeler from the International Safety Training College. Now, I'm not telling you that you must come and use our services, although it would be great for you to work with you. But what I am asking you to do is to do something about it before it's too late. Thanks very much.